Hello friends, it's Chops, and today we're going to take a look at one of the most hotly debated topics in Twinking history. Is the Pendulum of Doom actually better than the Bloodied Arcanite Reaper? If you know anything about 39 Twinking, you've probably seen some eye-wateringly high prices on the auction house for the Pendulum of Doom and asked yourself, is it really worth it? If you're curious about 39 Warrior Twinking, you've probably looked into this. You did some Google searching and found some discussions on some old archived message boards that basically revolved around people doing some back-of-the-napkin math, some guesswork, some theory crafting, and come to the conclusion that, yes, the Pendulum of Doom is far superior to the Bloodied Arcanite Reaper. But you're not going to really find anybody who did some side-by-side comparisons with both weapons against the testing dummy. But I've got a Pendulum of Doom. I've got a Bloodied Arcanite Reaper. I'm bored on a Saturday night. Let's find out. So the first thing I wanted to find out was just what the proc rate was on the fatal wound from the Pendulum of Doom. There was a lot of guesswork going on, anywhere from 1 to 5%. Some people said it's as high as 10%. I wanted to know for sure, and I figured the best way to know was to get a huge sample size and just see what happened. So I waddled my dwarf self over to Menethil, where I know there are some level 1 target dummies. I right-clicked on a target dummy, started auto-swinging, and then went and got some snacks. Watched a few Warhammer YouTube videos. Let it go for a full hour to see just how often it was. And then I did it again. 2 full hours of swinging into target dummy, came to the conclusion that the fatal wound procs off roughly 3% of your attacks. The first thing I asked myself was, well, is it a proc per minute mechanic? Maybe, much like Crusader, the more often I swing it, the more often it's going to proc. So then I decided I wanted to do the same thing, but with a full rotation. Now, I'm a little nuts, but I'm not going to sit there swinging at a target dummy for a whole hour with my full rotation. So I decided to break it up into little 5-minute chunks. In fact, I did 12 5-minute chunks of Rend, Whirlwind, and Overpower. Now, I didn't waste too much time thinking about the perfect rotation. I just wanted to get as many swings in those 5 minutes as possible. Like I said, I did this 12 times for a grand total of 60 minutes of uptime. And what I found out was, in a full rotation, the fatal wound from Pendulum of Doom procs off approximately 1.4% of your attacks. That is not great, but it lines up with what I've experienced in actual gameplay. It is extremely rare to get a Pendulum of Doom proc off of an arena match. They're just not long enough, and it just doesn't proc that frequently. In a full-blown Warsong Gulch, I might get 2 or 3 procs, and in a particularly busy Erethy Basin, I might get about 5. It just doesn't proc frequently enough. Now, that 1.4% chance to proc lines up perfectly with the 1.4% crit provided by the Bloodied Arcanite Reaper. Now, the pod procs for roughly 300 to 350 damage when it does hit on average, and crit strikes provide an extra, you guessed it, about 300 to 350 damage on your swings. But you're screaming at your computer screen already. I can practically hear it. But Chops, the proc from the pod can crit. And yes, it can. But because it's an extra attack, it can also be dodged, it can be parried, it can be blocked, or it can miss if you're the type of hooligan that doesn't run hit cap. So we're going to go ahead and call that one a wash. And just to make this clear, I'm going to state it bluntly right now. The pod proc is a non-factor. It just doesn't matter. You are going to crit more frequently with the Bloodied Arcanite Reaper and provide yourself just as much damage as you would get from the proc from the pod. Sorry. The next thing I wanted to test was, well, what does it look like in the real world? After all, this is 39 Twink PvP. We aren't raiding. We're not going to get 5, 10, 15 minutes, a full hour of uptime on a target. Damage is going to come in short bursts before we get crowd controlled off of whoever it is we're attacking. So I came up with the idea of doing what I called simulated FC dives. I would charge the target dummy, hamstring it, rend it. When Taste for Blood procced, I was going to overpower it, and then that was it. I figured this was a fair approximation of what an FC dive would look like in a Warsong Gulch. You get the charge, hamstring, rend off. You're probably going to get the Taste for Blood proc, and then you're going to get rooted or feared or nova'd or hunter trapped. Something is going to pull the FC away from you or pull you away from the FC, and that's your burst window. So I did it 10 times with the Pendulum of Doom, then 10 more times with the Bloodied Arcanite Reaper. In fact, I did it 11 times each because I allowed each setup a mulligan. Just you didn't get a Crusader proc, nothing crit. It was just a bad run altogether, right? So I did 11 times each. That way, each build got a mulligan, and then I averaged them all together. And drum roll. On average, the Pendulum of Doom did 127 more damage per dive. That's it. Terrible. But you say, because you do know a thing or two about twinking and weapon damage scaling, but you say the Pendulum of Doom is a slower weapon and therefore scales better with the more AP you have, the more attack power. And I know you, Chops. You run a high crit build. Well. I threw on my high attack power gear and decided to run the tests again. The Pendulum of Doom did, on average, 104 more damage per dive. It was a closer race with more AP. Guys, I hate to break it to you. I know the Pendulum of Doom is a legendary weapon, but it's just not that much better than the Bloodied Arcanite Reaper. But you say, yes, Chops, but yes, it does have more burst potential than the Bloodied Arcanite Reaper, and that matters. And folks, I'm comfortable saying that. Even if you look at the numbers and you notice that the highest amount of damage done over the course of these 44 tests was actually done with the Bloodied Arcanite Reaper, yes, I'm comfortable saying that the Pendulum of Doom has higher burst potential. But if all you care about on your 39 warrior is burst potential, well, folks, that's sword spec.